Good evening, everybody. First of all, I'll run through the fire evacuation procedures. But being in the council chamber means we had to reorientate everything, of course. And I know we're feeling a little bit distant, but it's the most practical way accommodating everybody in the chamber this evening. For those of you that are speaking, there are 3 chairs there we've identified for visiting speakers. And as we go through the applications, I'll be calling each one of each of the speakers down. Please take a seat there. You'll see the microphones in front of you. They're very sensitive, and it's the right-hand white button you'll see below the microphone screen itself. It's fairly straightforward. Fire evacuation for evening meetings in the council chamber. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exit is located at the rear of this room. You can see the fire exit symbols at the back there for the public. Go down the stairs and meet in the War Memorial Park. Members, please note that this meeting is being webcast live on the internet, and that's confirmed. And please switch your phones off or turn to silent. It's 6:30 and I'll start the meeting of the Development Control Committee. For the benefit of members of the public attending, I would like to explain who everybody is, not around this table. Of course, this is all slightly different tonight. My name is Councillor Paul Miller and I'm the chairman of the committee. Down the side of the top table here and on the wings of the table are the councillors who will sit on this committee and who will be making the decisions of the applications before us this evening. Immediately to my left and right are the officers who will be advising councillors. I'd like to explain that the Development Control Committee is a regulatory committee and not a political meeting. The committee will be examining the evidence brought before us tonight and will make decisions based on planning reasons. We are guided by national and local planning policy and guidance. May I ask all speakers, including visiting members, to speak clearly and return to their seats once their presentation is complete and following any questions from members. No further dialogue between members of the committee and speakers will be permitted once questioning has finished. May I ask all committee members to avoid repetition and to keep any comments on each planning item to a maximum of 4 minutes. I understand that planning can be emotive, and I ask everybody remains polite and professional throughout this evening. Right, I will start with the agenda items, starting agenda item number 1, apologies for absence and substitutions. We have 1 apology for absence, that's Councillor Keating. Are there any other absentees or resignations? No. Thank you. Declarations of interest. Right, Councillor Goodison first.
Thank you, Chair. It's appropriate for me to leave the committee when we're discussing the first one, and I'll speak as ward councillor to the committee as opposed to sitting here.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. Item 5, I'm predetermined, and I will speak as ward councillor.
Thank you. Anybody else? Declarations of interest? Thank you. There are no urgent matters tonight. We come on to minutes of previous meetings. The minutes of the meetings held on the 24th of October 2019 and the 6th of November 2019. I will move that we can sign those minutes, providing they're accurate. If there are any comments on the accuracy, and can I accept that as being content? Thank you very much. I will sign them at the end of the meeting. Moving on to applications for planning permission, and we'll be running through on the update sheet so we include everything. Item number 1, and by the way, the application item number 4 has been withdrawn. If some people may not have got that message, but item number 4 has been withdrawn. Item number 1, if I could ask Councillor Douse to come forward, please. And if I could ask you just to sit tight while the officer introduces the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is an application for the erection of 3 detached dwellings with garages, accesses off the existing accessway, serving the existing properties. There is no update, and the officer's recommendation is for approval.
Councillor Douse, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you. May I first thank the Council for giving me the opportunity to put before you the objections to this proposal from the Old Basing and Lichpit Parish Council. We welcome the support and views explored will be put forward by other speakers who will represent the views and concerns of over 60 local residents who live in the immediate area. This proposal has come before the Planning Committee of the Old Basing and Lichpit Parish Council a number of times. Firstly, when it was proposed to build 9 residences and now 3 large houses with their respective detached garages. Our unanimous objections to this proposal remain unchanged. I would bring to your attention the following. The proposal is against the Old Basing and Lichpit Neighbourhood Local Plan with its desire to enhance and preserve the character of the conservation area in which it lies. The impact of the increasing traffic on the local area while the building of the proposed houses takes place and after the completion of the development. This part of Pyatt's Hill is a picturesque, quiet cul-de-sac, only 2.8 metres wide in parts, that will cause concern, particularly in summer when hedges and bushes grow, to cyclists on this national cycle route and pedestrians and dog walkers alike. It does not provide the type of housing that is in keeping with the immediate area. All houses on the west side of Pyatt's Hill are large properties situated within similarly large plots of land. The proposed 3 houses would occupy a relatively small plot of land, and the related drives and roadway necessary to access the current single exit on the development would impact on the diversity of the site. The objections to the proposal put by the South East Office of Historic England and Hampshire County archaeologist are that the development may impact on the scheduled monument called Pyatt's Hill Entrenchment, commonly referred to as Park Pale, which would have enclosed an area set aside as a royal deer park and constructed between the 11th and 15th century. The current plans indicate that the locations of some of the proposed buildings may be as close as 5 metres to the entrenchment. There are few historic monuments within the borough, and the threat to one should be avoided. In order to build the proposed houses and garages, a number of mature, deciduous broadleaf trees would need to be felled in contravention of the borough's own landscape, biodiversity and tree supplementary planning document. This is also unacceptable under Section 12 and 16 of the National Planning Policy Framework. There are concerns raised by the Council's own tree response team in that the proposed development will be sited within 20 metres of the nearby Pyatt's Hill Copse, ancient woodland and site of intensive natural conservation. I would finally add that policy EM1 of the adopted Basingstoke and Deane Borough Local Plan 2011 to 2029 requires the development proposals must respect, enhance and not be detrimental to the character or visual amenity of the landscape likely to be affected, with particular regard to the visual amenity and scenic quality of tree and ancient woodland and hedgerows.
Thank you very much. Members, questions for the Parish Councillor? Questions? Nope. Thank you very much, Councillor. Ms. Rainbow and Mr. Little, please. Good evening, and you have 4 minutes between you.
Good evening, councillors. On behalf of Cycling UK and Cycling Basingstoke, our objection to the planning application remain unchanged. We do not consider this road wide enough to accommodate additional motor traffic, however little, without hindering or endangering people cycling or walking. Close passes of cyclists and near misses are a real issue. This is the main arterial cycle route linking the south of the town, mainly residential, with the north of the town where most employment is, and is therefore popular with commuters. The inspector was not aware of this. It is the only continuous cycle route across the town centre which avoids dangerous roads and junctions, and therefore usable by children and people who would otherwise not feel safe to cycle. The road is narrow, has no lighting, footways or cycle lanes, rural in character, but actually part of a greater urban area. Mitigation for climate change, new guidelines by both South Strands and Hampshire County Council place increasing importance on safe, continuous direct routes for cycling, either segregated from motor traffic or on quiet roads such as this one, with minimal cars.
Tom Lytle from 26 Piatt's Hill, speaking on behalf of myself, my wife Heather, and 59 other concerned residents who live on Piatt's Hill or immediately next to it, and the proposed development. As you know, the development of Piatt's House is within the old Basing Conservation Area, and combined with the lane, Piatt's Hill, are both unique and cannot be found anywhere else in Basingstoke. The area is an oasis of calm and tranquility that is used as a precious amenity by the 61 residents who appreciate what the development will do to this area. A total of 25 concerns appear on your pages 69 and 70 of your brief to the effect of the development on the OBCA. Another 16 on page 70 of your brief relates to its effect on highway matters. And finally, 10 appear on page 71 related to its impact on the existing natural environment of the OBCA. I can read these if you like, but all of these are serious concerns raised by people, and I repeat, who live immediately next to the proposed development and know what this will do to their beloved conservation area and lane. More importantly, you've heard the comments from Councillor Doust, which we support, and more important, we support the concerns of Heather Rainbow, particularly because the use of Piatt's Hill to access additional houses is unacceptable due to the standard and layout of the road as specified by Richard Parks Consultancy for the previous housing development submitted for this house. Every conservation team officer, including the current one, have grave concerns about this development or any development at Piatt's House because of the urbanizing effect it will produce. The conservation officer states the proposal will result in a change to the character of this part of the conservation area, which will result in less than substantial harm to the significance of the conservation area, and harm will occur. He concluded, Mr. Jonathan Hockley, concluded that less than substantial harm does not equate to less than substantial objection, and he gave substantial importance and weight to the desirability of preserving or enhancing the character or appearance of the OBCA. Finally, can you consider the proposed 3 houses as being affordable, and that they will encourage the younger generation to live here? Okay. Well, thus, based on all the serious objections, I would ask that you please vote to dismiss this application and protect Piatt's House, Piatt's Hill Entrenchment, Piatt's Lane, and Old Basing Conservation from this development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, do you have questions for the speakers? I have one technical question, and address this to Heather Rainbow. The road, in page 82 of the report, it states that the road is considered to be wide enough to allow car passes cyclists based on advice contained within the manual for streets. It is my understanding that guidance recently, and I think it's early 2019, was that any motorist should give a clearance of 1.5 meters when passing a cyclist. Is this your understanding that, is this in the manual for streets? I don't know whether it's been updated, but, and also, am I correct in what I've heard in the public domain?
I'm not sure. I doubt whether that is in the manual for streets, but it is a recommended overtaking distance as given in the highway code, which is a bit vague. And so some police forces are actually going out with a mat, which is 1.5 meters wide, and stopping motorists that overtake too closely. We have a problem in Basingstoke because of this very problem, because obviously if you close pass, the person is likely to fall off the bike because they'll be knocked by the side mirrors. In this particular case, probably the cyclist would have to pull in to the verge and sort of crouch in the bushes. So it's a legal recommendation.
Thank you very much. No more questions? Thank you. Mr. Pettit, Mr. Freeman, please. Should I say Dr. Freeman? Gentlemen, you have 4 minutes between you.
Thank you, Chairman. Members of the committee, my name is Mark Pettit, and I prepared and submitted this planning application. Sat alongside me is one of the applicants, Dr. Hugh Freeman, who has resided at Pyatt's House with his wife Meg since 1990. The application that is before members seeks full planning permission for the erection of 3 detached dwellings on land that currently forms part of the garden to Pyatt's House. It's recommended for approval, and we fully support this recommendation. Now, members may be familiar with the site. It was the subject of a planning application in 2016, where permission was sought to comprehensively redevelop the site for 9 dwellings. The application went to committee in August 2016 with a recommendation for approval, but was refused by members for reasons relating to highway safety and the lack of a 106 agreement. In all other respects, the scheme was considered acceptable. The council's decision was pursued at appeal, but was dismissed due to concerns held about the impact that the development would have on the old Basing conservation area. In all other respects, the scheme was considered acceptable. Indeed, the inspector was happy with the principle of development, was happy with the impact on the scheduled monument, and was satisfied that Pyatt's Hill could accommodate the additional traffic associated with 7 additional homes. This current application has sought to address the concerns expressed previously by the appeal inspector in respect of conservation matters. It represents a drastic reduction from what was presented previously, and we've worked with the planning officer over a course of nearly 12 months to get to a point where an appropriate balance has been struck between achieving good design, conserving heritage assets, ensuring highway safety, minimising the loss of trees, and making more effective use of land. The previous scheme sought to remove the 2 existing dwellings from the site and erect 9 new houses. This current scheme will retain these existing dwellings and erect just 3 additional homes. No additional vehicle access points are proposed along Pyatt's Hill, which will allow the verdant edge to the site to be retained, whilst the 20-metre buffer has been left between the southernmost plot and the woodland to the south. We have responded accordingly to concerns expressed during the course of the application and arranged the houses so that they follow the pattern and grain of development along this side of Pyatt's Hill. This is not the cul-de-sac development that was refused by the council and which the appeal inspector felt was too suburban. This is a low-density development that will sit comfortably in this part of the conservation area, away from the scheduled monument, and a generous distance away from the houses on the opposite side of Pyatt's Hill. There are no technical reasons why this application should not prevail. There's been no objection from Highways, the Tree Officer, the Biodiversity Officer, Historic England, Archaeology, Waste, or Environmental Health. Conservation have raised some concerns with the design of the proposed houses. However, I would share the same view as the planning officer. that the traditional approach to the scheme respects the character of the dwellings in the area. The applicants are happy to accept all 33 of the suggested conditions set out in the committee report and have offered to provide an interpretation board on the monument itself for the benefit of those using the public right-of-way and to secure appropriate future management of this part of the monument through a management agreement. In summary, this site provides a fantastic opportunity to provide much needed housing within the borough at a time when the council cannot demonstrate an adequate supply. This current scheme is markedly different to the scheme presented in 2016, and we hope the members appreciate the efforts that have been made to overcome the concerns expressed previously. We believe that this proposal responds successfully to the sensitivities of the site, and certainly the positive consultation responses and the officer's recommendation would suggest that it has. The site falls within the settlement policy boundary of Old Basing, next door to a large strategic housing allocation, and is a logical site for a modest residential scheme. The previous inspector's concerns have been addressed, and we would therefore respectfully request that planning permission be granted accordingly in line with your officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, questions to the applicant? No questions. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Councillor Goodison. And you have 4 minutes, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I'll attempt to be as brief as possible. The difficulty with this application is quite simply the usual one: location, location, location. Sadly, the location is not suitable. For a start with, we've got the access problem. Pyatt's Hill is 800 metres long. The first 200 metres are relatively wide, and there's not a problem for cars to pass each other. The 600 metres for the remaining it are very, very narrow. Cars cannot pass each other. The dust lorry, except lorries of that side, would take up literally the whole of the width of the road. There is no pedestrian way. We've heard from Heather Rainbow that it's part of a national or cycling route. Lots of people, there are some 60 residents who objected. I have a list of them here. They all live in either Pyatt's Hill or in Petchy Place, on the edge of Chinham, on the up at the top of Pyatt's Hill. They're all local. Residents on the Chinham side have no vehicle access, of course, into Pyatt's Hill, but they cycle and walk into Basing Village. I imagine tomorrow there'll be a lot of traffic as they will need to walk down to the polling stations. I would ask that the committee listen to what those residents are, or listen and accept the concerns of the residents. Parish Planning Committee, you've heard, voted without exception to oppose. They are elected by and represent the residents. They know, they all live for a long time in the village. They know the village, they know what's good for the village, they know what's not good for the village. I would ask the committee to listen to the parish. The previous application was rejected by this committee and was appealed. If I may, I'd like to just read out one or two sections from the appeal, from the inspector's report. He says, I consider the main issues to be whether the proposal would preserve or enhance the character or appearance of the Old Basing Conservation Area. And secondly, the effect of the proposal on highway safety on Pyatt's Hill. Later on, he develops those points by saying, less than substantial harm does not equate to a less than a substantial objection. And I give a substantial importance and weight to the desirability of preserving or enhancing the character or appearance of the conservation area. While I place weight on the identified public benefits of the scheme, I do not consider that they outweigh the less than substantial harm that would be caused to the conservation area. As heritage assets are irreplaceable, any harm or loss should require clear and unconvincing justification, and I'm not convinced that the benefits identified provide such justification. He therefore goes on, I therefore conclude that the proposal would neither preserve nor enhance the character and appearance of the Old Basing Conservation Area. The proposal would be contrary to the framework and policy EM1 of the local plan, which states that all development must conserve or enhance the quality. And very briefly, the last sentence. Sorry? Right. Well, I would wind up simply, as I'm not permitted to read the last section, I would wind up by saying that I think it should be considered rather impertinent to ignore the opinions and judgments of the inspector in this case, because nothing has changed. The circumstances are exactly the same. The objections are exactly the same as they were in 2017. Thank you.
Members, any questions for the ward councillor? Nope. Thank you very much. Questions to officers? None. Debate? Councillor Woodridge, Westbrook.
Thanks, Chairman. Having listened to what we've heard tonight, my objection to this is slightly different to what we've heard already. The report talks about the weight given to the MPPF as we cannot demonstrate a 5-year worth of deliverable sites. And the report declares that this application makes effective use of land under Section 11 of the MPPF. I don't believe it does. Our own housing SPD refers to development needing to focus on 2 and 3 bedroom dwellings, and the Old Basing and Litchpit neighbourhood plan puts an emphasis on the provision of dwellings for smaller households, and even our own conservation officer considers the designs to be somewhat grandiose. I believe that a better scheme could and should come forward, a scheme that does meet our identified housing needs and ensures the development makes optimal use and potential of this site. This site had, as we've heard already, had an application for 9 properties previously refused, and the decision was upheld at appeal. Yet it's worth noting that the inspector had no issues with the traffic generation on that report, as we've heard earlier from the applicant. And I'm not suggesting we have 9 homes again, but certainly more than 3 large homes that don't identify with our housing needs as a council. I cannot support the current application, and in my opinion it's contrary to 2 important points in Section 11 of the MPPF, which clearly states that where there's an existing or anticipated shortage of land for meeting identified housing needs, it's especially important that planning policies and decisions avoid homes being built at low densities and ensure that developments make optimal use of the potential of each site, and that local planning authorities should refuse applications which they consider fail to make efficient use of land. I think that we should refuse this application, Chairman, on that basis.
Is that a proposal, Councillor? In that case, do I have a seconder to that proposal for refusal on those particular grounds? Councillor Harvey, do you wish to speak to that?
Thank you, Chair. Just listening to the arguments that are made and the officer's report, I was drawn to page 76 of the report and paragraph 193 regarding the MPPF, where it states that we as a committee should give great weight to the assets conservation and to the impact on the Schedule Ancient Monument, and that in doing so, even within our own local policies EM11, we state clearly that we must see where it is demonstrated that the understanding, the character and setting of the heritage asset has been taken on board by the applicant. Now, what is clear is that while it is conditioned that the applicant is to provide a management plan for the protection, or for that matter the improvement, which is quite also clear in the policies, it isn't just about the management, the policy actually talks about the improvement of the asset. That is not submitted as part of this application. We do not have a management plan in front of us. It is left to a condition of the application that the applicant will come forward with a management plan. So while we have the application in front of us, what we do not have, to any satisfactory detail, is a proposal of a plan of how they propose to protect, with detail, the scheduled ancient monument. Now, if we're guided by the NPPF and we're guided by EM11, we should give great weight to our consideration of this development's impact upon the scheduled ancient monument. I would say that is a fairly important piece of evidence for us to make that judgment, to make that consideration. Now, we also talk about the semi-rural nature of this site, the edge of the village, its nature, its setting, its character. And again, our officers guide us that curtilages may cause the loss of character of Park Pale, and that again is a comment picked up by the planning inspector. So in that sense, there is an argument around the visual setting of the location itself in the context of development and in the context of the scheduled ancient monument. And then we come to the point about less than substantial harm. The point for me about less than substantial harm is that it is an acknowledgement that there is harm done, but that it is less than substantial. Therefore, there is a subjective analysis of whether or not we as the committee agree with our officers' analysis that it is less than substantial. Now, without the management plan, without the context set of the impact, semi-rural, the edge of the village, all those elements put in here for our analysis and our understanding, then my argument is that at the moment, I am yet to be persuaded that that is not harmful. I don't have a benchmark to say that it is not harmful. In my mind at the moment, I see the opposite. In the sense of the conservation area, and again the guidance of the planning inspector, his argument about outweighing the less than substantial harm, the objectivity, at least his analysis of it, is such that I'm yet to be convinced. So at the moment I would support the recommendation for refusal, because I have seen no arguments for me to say at the moment those issues have been addressed. And without that management plan, even though it's conditioned, and I respect that it's conditioned, it leaves me concerned as to what that might involve. And we should be mindful of the scheduled ancient monument in that context.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Now, it's been moved and proposed for refusal. I'm going to continue with a debate on that proposal. And the two reasons given that I understand was the one given by Councillor Westbrook.
Do you want the direct one?
Yeah, so we're talking about the NPPF 11.1, paragraph 123, A and C. I think that's correct. And obviously Councillor Harvey's different.
And also Councillor Harvey's, right. Now, any more on debate on this? Because I saw Councillor Potter's hand go up, and I understand you wanted to support the proposal.
Simply that, Chair. I would have seconded the proposal. I don't need to do that now. I think you've taken that.
Unless you want to add anything.
I don't at this juncture. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other debate on this particular topic? It's been properly moved and seconded for refusal. I'll take a vote on that. All those in favour of refusal, based on those two reasons for refusal, all those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's carried. Officers?
Thank you, Chair. That the application is refused. First reason for refusal that it's contrary to paragraph 123 of the NPPF, A and C, and contrary to the housing mix policy, I think, because it's not meeting that need, and that in the absence of supporting it or information to justify the harm to the listed to the conservation area and the ancient monument. Sorry? Yeah. That's under 1, 2, 3. Yeah, on the second one is in terms of the impact on the heritage asset and the lack of information to make that proper assessment.
Thank you, officers. We'll move on now to item number 2, and I could ask Mr. Dawson to come forward, please, and Mrs. Lloyd. Good evening, and if you could just sit tight while the officers present the application. Officers?
This is a planning application at Upper Cufford Farm, Cufford Lane in Bramley. The application is for the erection of 2 numbered 4-bedroomed barn-style dwellings and access. The recommendation is for refusal. There is an update. It's on page 1 of the update papers. There's notes of the site visit. Comments that were made on the site visit are addressed in the officer comments in relation to the previous buildings that were on the land. And then there's just a rewrite of reason for refusal 1 with a couple of extra words in there to make it was sort of an edit, a correction, and the new inserted words are underlined on page 2.
Thank you very much. Ms. Dawson and Ms. Lloyd, you have 4 minutes between you. I'll leave you to split it up.
Good evening, councillors. I'm speaking to you today as the site owner with my husband of Upper Cufford Farmhouse in Bramley, where we have lived for 13 years. The principal reasons for refusal appear to be the impact of the proposal to the setting and the significance of our house, and yet there is planning consent for 350 houses within 90 metres of our front door, in addition to the existing 400 houses at Razors Farm. Upper Cufford Farmhouse was once in open countryside, but no more. The farmland that it sits upon will be covered in urban houses. Crowdace will develop Cufford Farm. New houses are likely to be similar to those at Razors Farm, whose impact of white 2 to 3 storey houses is already substantial and could be seen on your visit. Such urban houses will cover the land in front of our farmhouse. The damage to the setting and significance has already been done. Our proposal will not change that. The views of the listed building will not be obstructed. The farmhouse will remain the dominant property, complemented on both sides by the existing barns and our new barns. This is not housing in open countryside, but dwellings alongside and respecting other properties. This development is sustainable and will improve the north side of Cufford Lane as a buffer against the major housing estate across the road. If buffer-type planting needs supplementing, this can be done. Razors Farm has a similar Grade 2 listed farmhouse. We don't understand how our 2 new barns can be refused, whilst 4 new barns were accepted at Razors Farm. In summary, the setting has already been harmed. These additional units do not cause further harm. The listed building will be complemented by these 2 barn-style homes. Please, can we have approval of these 2 attractive homes? Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, sir. Edward Dawson, advising the applicant. This plan has been quite a long time in coming because of the thinking and planning involved. A previous application was withdrawn to allow for refinements. It benefited from the advice of the Conservation Studio on heritage questions. The reasons for refusal as set out, in my view, are matters of opinion. Conservation is not about fixing things in aspic. It is about improvement and enhancement. Planning itself is about the future. The planning balance here clearly tips towards approval on grounds of sustainability and valid need. The setting is not, in my view, affected in a harmful way by these 2 houses. They complement the existing group of dwellings and barns within the area. The plan recreates the farmyard setting in a modern milieu. There is no objection in principle from the parish council. The heritage aspects have been well covered and the effect on the historic farmhouse is, we think, positive. It can be appreciated in its preserved state. The overall visual amenity also remains unaffected. The group of dwellings which you saw on the site viewing, sir, have not eroded any of the original rural character. They are a modern adaptation, as it will be with these houses. The harm identified by the officers is of minor form, being less than substantial. We say the benefits are positive and sustainable. Mrs. Lloyd has just mentioned the recent approval of houses within the setting of a listed building. The retention of settings is important. but these must be seen in a modern context rather than as museum exhibits. Finally, so I will conclude by saying that we believe the overall proposals are beneficial and enhance the amenity and value of the site without damage, and in the absence of demonstrable harm, in view of the benefits to the borough, the applicants fully deserve a grant of consent with conditions this evening. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Members, questions to the applicant? No. Thank you very much. There are no other speakers declared at this point. Questions to officers? No questions? Debate? Councillor Tomlin.
I had to press the button. Right, there we go. Sorry. As you can see on the paper that I brought this for a discussion to this committee, on the grounds very much as the applicant has outlined here, that we have a listed building. It has some attraction to it, but we've chosen to put 350 houses within 90 metres of the site. They will be urban. The whole aspect of the farm will potentially, if you members would like to debate this, to be considered to change the open countryside nature or not. The other thing is the reference was made to the Razors farmstead. There's a very, very similar situation there with a very large development outside that. And that has got 4 new dwellings. Maybe they were put there as the developer was able to provide those, and that would enable him to fund developing the farm. But even so, it's a very similar application I would put into our debate, if you wish to consider that. So it is down to subjectiveness about the harm or otherwise to the listed building. We saw the site on Friday. The building or potential buildings were marked out. They're 30 metres, 100 feet away from the building. So whether that is a consideration we can talk about, I would certainly welcome to understand this committee's feeling. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else for debate? Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. My general gut feeling in Bramley is that Bramley's had enough development, but this is only 2 houses, and 2 in the scale of things that has happened and is happening in Bramley is minimal. And two houses, and they are character houses within the area of a listed building. I'm really finding it difficult to object to this proposal. So I think for that reason I propose it for approval.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Mrs. Westbrook, thank you. And may I have reasons?
I don't think it does cause less than so substantial. I mean, fundamentally, is the reversal of the reasons for refusal. I don't agree with them, so turn them round. It's as simple as that, really.
The officers would like to comment.
Yes. So are you saying there is no harm?
I'm not saying there's no harm. What I'm saying is that the harm is insufficient to refuse the application.
So, less substantial harm has been identified by the and that means that even if though it's described as less substantial harm, it doesn't
equate, in officers' view, to a lesser substantial objection. All the NPPF and our own local plan policies and also the Heritage SPD all refer to the need to give great weight to the preservation of heritage assets, and they have to be outweighed by significant public benefits if you are going to override that. And that is enshrined in case law as well. So we just want to make you and re-emphasise the importance of the weight that's been given to the refusal reasons that have been set out in the agenda.
Okay. On the basis that I'm saying that the harm is minimal, and minimal falls in, I appreciate that minimal falls in within the category of less than substantial harm. We are in a housing deficit situation, so there I think the public benefit outweighs the harm that is being done.
You still need to identify what the public benefit is, and also you refer to the housing supply position, and looking at paragraph 11, which we've referred to in the main report as well, there's only a presumption in favour unless there's a conflict with other policies, and in this particular case, heritage assets are protected, and there are no clear reasons. It says the application of policies in this framework that protect areas or assets of particular importance provide a clear reason for refusing the development. We're therefore saying there is no public benefit that outweighs you know, the harm that's been identified. And I think if you are going to look to support the application, you do need to identify what the public benefit is.
The public benefit is 2 more houses in the borough when we don't have a housing land supply. There's also the public benefit of creating a buffer between the existing farmhouse and the horrendous new development that's going to be directly opposite it. That's my opinion. Those are my reasons. You may not agree with them, but those are the reasons I'm giving.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. The balance in this one is interesting, isn't it, between a development that's allocated in our plan that would have a significant change on the character, the landscape, the visual impact, the amenity, the context. That development that's already been referred to, 350 odd houses, is going to utterly change the context of this area. If you then take into account that on another allocated site within close proximity, we have already had a judgment, there has already been an evidence case made that a development against a listed building, even in that context, was considered acceptable, then we have a context in which we can consider whether or not, and again, we're on this sliding scale of where's the objectivity, subjectivity of less than substantial harm. If that is the case in this context, what do these 2 dwellings do when you're adding all of that up? And I think I agree with colleagues, that's what we've got to weigh up here. Now, is this application premature in the context that we are now judging it set against this circumstance, and how much weight can we give to that context? I don't know the answer. I'm weighing that up in my mind. Would we have a different view, and would officers have a different view if the 350 houses were already built? Not just the fact that they're being given permission to be built. But as a committee, we never take that into account. What we do as a committee is take account of permitted development. What has been given permission in the context of our deliberations? And here we have 350 units, literally next door to this site, that have been given permission. Now, surely that changes the context. So when I look at page 116, and look at the officers arguing, quite rightly so, that it would result in less than substantial harm to the setting of a Grade 2 listed building, what consideration was given when the permission for the 350 houses was approved or agreed or even allocated on the context of that Grade 2 listed building? And does that argument hold water? I'm trying to weigh this up. Does that argument hold water when we're now rejecting just 2? Because surely it should have held water when we were even considering 350. I just can't get the balance right in my head at the moment, and at the moment I'm coming down on the basis of saying it doesn't make sense to me, and I can't make heads. I can understand in other contexts of things we've already debated, but in this context it doesn't make sense to me at the moment.
If I can just possibly clarify some things. So in terms of Upper Cuffold Farm, 350 houses, which is outline consent, the area immediately in front of these listed barns, these buildings, is kept clear of development. And that is something that was part of the development brief, to retain the setting of those listed buildings. So that has been taken on board, and there will be no buildings in that area. With regard to, I think people are talking about Razor's Farm and the listed buildings, listed farmhouse there. That was in, I would say, a different context, albeit it was the same. Again, at that point, when that application was considered, and you may remember that the committee refused it and it went to a public inquiry, we were in a position then, again, where we didn't have a 5-year land supply. And in that instance there, the significant public benefit of that amount of housing was considered to weigh in favour of that development. What we're trying to say as officers is 2 houses are not a significant public benefit to outweigh the less than substantial harm. That's our advice to you.
So I hear the argument and I don't disagree with your logic. The bit I can't get is 350 houses, even if there is an element of buffer and landscaping element to it, 350 houses fundamentally changes the context of this location. And that, for me, in the context, is saying 2 versus 350. We've already given outline permission for 350, and that didn't seem, because that was the public benefit. The public benefit, it seems absolutely surreal. And then we argue over 2 having a dramatic impact or a less. For me, I'm just caught in this contradictory position on this, but I respect what you're saying. I understand why you're saying.
Just come back on one more point. Arguably, and as we acknowledge on page 116, arguably, the context you've just outlined is even more reason to ensure that the significance of the setting of the listed buildings is preserved, so that it can be appreciated, because even it's like even more special because of that context that you've just outlined. And then just going back to that previous application, we've just talked about 3 houses and the importance of the conservation and heritage assets in that case. So that's 3 units, and this is 2. So it's equally as important as the previous case that you were discussing as well. But we do acknowledge the context, and as officers, we feel it's even more important to preserve that significance.
Can I just it's also note that we seem to be talking about a listed building. This is a group of listed buildings, each individually listed for their own right, which then makes a significant group, which is the farmstead aspect. I just wanted to, we all seem to be just referring to the listed building.
Forgive me my language. I mean, I get what's being said, but just in context, each application we consider on its merits, on its own merits in front of us. We are always encouraged to do that. We look at policy in that context of the application that's in front of us. The difference for me at the moment, and I still say is the point, in whatever else we may have considered as a starting point, for me at the moment, this is not a starting point. The way I'm seeing this is 352 houses, and we've already given permission for the 350 to have the impact. So I'm looking at it in a different context, perhaps, in terms of the impact on this location. Rightly or wrongly, that is what is in my mind at the moment in trying to justify this one way or the other.
Councillor Potter.
I was going to ask a question, but I think I'll just make a comment, I think, on the same line. It seems to me that it's difficult to argue the logic of the protection of a little oasis like this within this overall setting when the site itself has already, in my subjective view, obviously suffered less than substantial harm given the outline planning permission that's been granted for the 350 new homes. And I think, as Councillor Harvey says, in practical terms, where those 350 houses, mostly of a semi-urban design, being constructed, we would see this, as I describe it, little oasis very differently. And I think to say that that can be preserved as though those houses had not been given approval is, well, it defies logic in my view. And I think the argument for saying this less than substantial harm can be justified in these circumstances because of the influence of this mass development 90 metres away is an argument in itself that can be sustained, and therefore I would support the commentary that was made by Councillor Robinson and support the proposal he put forward.
I will say one more thing. In terms of context, I understand what you're saying in terms of the Upper Cuffo Farm allocation. Bearing in mind the decision you've just made on the one in Piatt's Hill, as the officer's report made clear there, that site is abutted by the east of Basingstoke allocation. So you have very, very similar circumstances. Now, on the one hand there, and I know it's each case on its own merits, on the one hand there you have said no to 3 units, but on this one here you have 2 units, and what we're trying to find out from you is what is the significant public benefit that you consider will outweigh the less than substantial harm. In terms of the context, they both sit against allocated sites, large residential allocations.
Any more for debate? Been moved and seconded for approval, and do officers have the reasons?
The reasons that I've been told was that the reverse the reasons for refusal. The question was asked, was there any harm? And it was no, there was not no, that's no, it's too double negative. It wasn't that there was no harm, but that there was insufficient harm. I think the word minimal was used. And that the public benefit was outweighing the harm, and I think the public benefit has been defined as 2 dwellings. Yeah, sorry, that's it, yeah.
Conditions? We've got to sort these out before the vote is taken.
I think conditions should be that they are built exactly in accordance with the plans submitted, and no permitted development rights should be allowed on them. That any extensions whatsoever should require planning permission.
Some conditions that we would recommend would be approved plans, time limit, materials, joinery details, construction methods statement. Then there's the issue of the noise of the railway. So there's a number of environmental health conditions relating to noise and ventilation, verification of the noise and ventilation, the post-completion surveys. There's contamination studies, then contamination verification. There's hours of construction, hours of delivery, water efficiency, obscure glazing, parking provided, garages to be retained, refuse storage, removal of permitted development rights to do extensions to the dwellings, additions to the roof, alterations to the roof, Class E structures which are freestanding structures in the gardens, remove permitted development rights for means of enclosure, landscape conditions, a requirement for details of boundary treatments, and if there's a need for any visibility displays on the covered lane.
Sorry, to make one more point. Obviously, a number of those would be pre-commencement conditions. So therefore, when you do vote, it would also be to give officers delegated authority to seek agreement, as we now have to do, with the applicant on any of those pre-commencement conditions.
It's been properly moved and seconded for approval with the reasons and condition mentioned. All those in favour of approval? Against? Thank you. I'll abstain. Right. Thank you very much. Just to confirm, officers?
Confirm the application is approved subject to the conditions that were read out.
Item number 3, Unit 10, Bessemer Road. And there is no update, no speakers. So, officers, present the application.
Thank you, Chair. This is an application for the change of use from Class B2 to D2, which is a specialist gym, a retrospective one. You might remember that the committee resolved to approve the application subject to reconsultation and no new adverse comments in relation to condition 2, which was hours of use, which had been changed. We've re-notified people, but objections have been received, which is why the application is back before you. So for consideration is just condition 2. As a result of the objections that have been received, the applicant has agreed to change the opening hours Saturdays and Sundays to start at 8 o'clock in the morning, and that's within the officer's report, so condition 2 has been amended. The officer's recommendation is for approval.
Questions to officers? No questions? Is there any debate on this at all? Councillor Harvey.
Now, having read the officer's report and appreciate what's been said, I move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Do you have a seconder? Councillor Bowen. Moved and seconded for approval. All those in favour? That's carried, officers.
That the application be approved subject to condition 2 on page 130 of the officer's report.
Thank you very much. Move on to item number 5. And Councillor Bell, please. Evening, Councillor Bell. If you'd just like to sit tight until the officers introduce the application.
Thank you, Chair. This is an application for change of use of part of an existing landscape buffer strip to the rear of number 6 and 7 Pond Road to residential garden land. And I draw your attention to the update paper and the viewing panel report, and also just to clarify that the application was called in by Councillor Tomlin and not Councillor Lovegrove. The officer's recommendation is for refusal.
Councillor Bell, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, councillors. This application is to incorporate a strip of land bordering the properties of number 6 and 7 Pond Road into the gardens of the said properties. The reason is that the areas are planted with trees and bushes on mounds of earth that take away the light from the properties and cause considerable dampness. The area is only at present 1.5 metres away from the properties. The impact the trees were having on the property number 6 was recognised by the arboriculture officer and horticulture officer of the day in 2001, when permission on Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council, a headed note paper, was given to the residents of number 6 to continue to prune the trees and shrubs. This has continued for the past 19 years on a regular basis. Likewise, the previous residents at number 7 Pond Road had permission in 2006 to do work on the trees and vegetation bordering their property, and the area was cleared down to the ground with the permission of officers of Basingstoke and Dean. This particular area had regrown, blocking out light and causing dampness close to the property. Both number 6 and 7 would like to move the present fencing bordering their properties 4 metres, which will eliminate the dampness problem coming from the trees and shrubs and allow light to get to the properties. Councillors, you saw the difference on how light was getting to number 6 as a result of the pruning compared to number 7. Without the maintenance, the trees would be 60 foot high bordering the property. The tree officer states that maintenance of trees in such an area as behind the property is done on a minimal intervention basis. Nobody has been from Basingstoke and Dean for 20 years. The trees would be 80 foot high if they had not been maintained behind number 6. The planning officer claims that the application is against policy EM1 landscape and EM5 green infrastructure of the local plan. The green infrastructure surrounding the estate will not be taken away completely, because there will still remain some 6 metres of trees and bushes bordering the area once the fences are moved, and they will remain as a barrier to the conservation area behind. Heritage has no problem with this application. In accordance informing
in correspondence informing us that the application is going to be recommended for refusal because it is not in accord with the policies in the local plan, the officer ends up by saying it is considered that the area can be maintained as it currently is, which to my mind is accepting that trees and shrubs are an intrusion to a light reaching the property and can continue pruning in the case of number 6 as you have done for the past 20 years. Also, the reason for approval put forward by the officer are no different to what the officer of the day put forward for application 1301594, which was for incorporating a strip of land into the gardens of 9 properties in Forest Close, bordering the conservation area. The policy quoted then was C7 of the 1996-2011 local plan, the protection, enhancement and replacement of existing leisure and community facilities, open spaces. Policy EM1 and EM5 quoted against this present application are an expansion of C7, so this application is similar to that of 2013-15, which was finally approved by councillors, that the trees were causing light and restrictions and dampness to their gardens. There is, however, one basic difference in that the trees were initially 10 to 15 metres away from the house, whereas here we have trees 1.5 metres away from the house. The evidence that has been presented with this application shows the light restrictions and dampness caused to the properties by the close proximity of the trees. In moving the tree line 4 metres away from the property and incorporating the land into the gardens of number 6 and 7 Pond Road will not affect the continuation of the green area around the estate because there remains the 6 metre minimum tree line bordering the conservation area. But it does mean that light will get to the houses and dampness from the close proximity to the trees will be eliminated. Thank you.
Members, questions to the applicant? No questions? Thank you very much. Councillor Robinson. Ward Councillor. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. A few years ago, quite a few members of the committee will remember sitting on 1700449 RET, which was an application in Bramley for somebody who wished to, or who already had extended their garden into public amenity land. This committee refused that application. Subsequently, it was allowed at appeal, and subsequent to that, Basingstoke and Dean Council refused to sell the land to the applicants. At that application, I made a statement which was something to the effect of, I do not support the change of use or sale of public amenity land to private residents for garden curtilage. On the 9th of October this year, we heard 19-01452/FUL, which was the Knowlings the application for the Montessori. And basically, I reiterated that statement. I do not support the change of use of land from public amenity to private curtilage. Having made those 2 statements, I do not feel that this one warrants me changing my opinion. And for that reason, I think I am quite clearly predetermined. And other than that, I have nothing to say. Thank you.
Members, any questions of the Ward Councillor? Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Debate. Councillor Westbrook. Questions to officers? They feel left out. I wouldn't want them to be left out. Any questions to officers? No, I'll leave any comment out a bit later. Councillor Westbrook, debate.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I support the officer's recommendation for refusal on this application. Firstly, the property team have highlighted that it's extremely unlikely that the council will sell this land given previous objections from the parish council and ward members. And I've had a look online at the tree and biodiversity officer's full comments, which do expand on those in the report. And they tell us in relation to the green infrastructure strategy, the sale of this area would erode a strategic green link through this area of Bramley Green. The provision of this strip of habitat was a requirement of the planning application for the pond close development, and that any incorporation into private amenity space will, through the removal of those trees, end up being replaced with non-native species and or garden paraphernalia. This can be seen behind Farriers Close, where a similar area of land was transferred to residential garden a few years ago. I think it's also important to note that a climate emergency update is going to our CEP committee next week, where it says that Basingstoke and Deane is an extremely green borough in terms of its natural environment, providing a significant amount of scope to absorb carbon, and that the Borough Council places a strong emphasis on this through its management of over 80,000 trees and 100 hectares of woodland on its own land. Whilst the Borough has significant green and open space and high quality built environment, it warns there is no room for complacency. In this respect, Council members have signalled that they wish to take urgent action in light of the urgent threat that climate change presents. A recommendation to the CEP committee will be, and I think this is important, the promotion of green lungs for the borough's campaign, maintaining existing trees and hedging and promoting biodiversity. That's why I'm supporting the officers on this one and will vote to refuse the application.
Yeah, agree for the recommendation. Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I totally agree with Councillor Westbrook on one aspect, and that we need more trees, but we need them in the right places. I think that from the viewing panel, members hopefully saw how close this woodland, or let's say it's become woodland, is to the houses. A bit of history, I think, is that that buffer is along the back of these properties it's like a double buffer. It's an extra screening buffer put in by developers on a piece of that sort of no man's land at the side of a development between that and the farm. So there's already a substantial greenland, and it's in the conservation area, sort of buffer to the farm. The land underneath the vegetation is in fact surplus soil formed into a bund, which makes any particular planting of species higher before it's even started. And that actually, going back in history 20 odd years, had a footpath running round it. So locals are telling me, which has obviously now become overgrown and is not used. So I put it really for our debate that the light that's now been taken from these properties is sort of contrary to, it's one of our policies, I think it actually refers to on page 164, policy M10, we require development to provide high levels of light. Well, this is let's say 20 years further on, and nobody knew quite how this was going to be done, and it hasn't been maintained other than by the applicant because of, well, having sought permission to do it, because the accessibility for the borough to actually come in there and maintain this has been very, well, it's not possible, so it hasn't happened. So in the sense, again, this is an application from someone who has not already taken the land and doing it retrospectively. This is someone seeking to address a problem with their I suppose amenities is the best way to describe it. And the one other thing I picked up in the report for consideration is that by moving the fence back, it says the problem will just move further away. Well, if it does, that's actually brought more light into the property, and so the problem, yes, will be further away, but you will have more light to the property. So I put that into the debate. If anybody wishes to carry on, please do so. If not, that's my comment. Thank you.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. I have all the sympathy, I think, for the residents who are impacted by the light issue, and I appreciate the context in which this is set, having similar examples in my own ward where development has taken place a long time ago with bunds created for a purpose that are now coming back to haunt those residents, really, to give them another issues. The problem we've got in terms of the balance on this is that the land in question was given in the original application, as we're told, as a landscaped area. It isn't as if this is some sort of natural overgrown land that has just happened to be. It is an area that within the original application was for landscaped area. If we are right and are listening to the arguments from our biodiversity officers and from the ecology officer in regard to the importance of the corridor and the ecological aspects of this, then to remove elements of this corridor might well do harm in that regard. It's a tough balance. Do you support those residents who obviously have an issue? Now, the maintenance of the land might be in context here, might be an important part of the debate. And we're into the Borough Council's regime of maintenance of its land and how it chooses to maintain the grounds maintenance operation. And I have no idea of the quality of that in this location, or, for example, what regime would be put in place for the maintenance of that in that location. But I would presume logically that that maintenance would be in accordance with what the biodiversity and ecology officers would be saying. Yeah, I think this one is a difficult one in the sense of I can get the impact on those residents and feel all the sympathy for it, and I've got casework the same, really. So I do understand it, but at the same time, and as we've got to think carefully of, if we're being told this is an important corridor, we shouldn't ignore that either. So I think this is one for weighing up those balances, isn't it?
Right, I've got two more speakers, but I will go back to Councillor Westbrook. Do I take your comment as a proposal?
Yes.
Fine, thank you. I will in time come to a seconder, but I'll do these two other speakers first. Do I have a seconder for that proposal? Councillor Mrs. Westbrook, thank you. Councillor Bound, we are debating now the officer's recommendation.
Okay, thank you. I'm broadly in agreement with Councillor Westbrook and Councillor Robertson, but completely taking on board what Councillor Harvey says. This is a difficult one, particularly for the resident, obviously, who has been maintaining that area outside of his fence line. And I do feel that if the borough owns a piece of land, then the borough should maintain that piece of land. And the area further down in the other garden that we went, where the lady obviously cannot get outside and do outside her fence at all and do anything about that piece of land because it's so overgrown, huge trees growing up there, it's obviously affecting their garden. I can understand the desire for herself and the particular applicant in this situation to want to alleviate the situation as it is. I'm going to vote along with the officer recommendation, but as I say, I do think if the borough owns a piece of land, the borough should maintain the piece of land.
Thank you, Councillor George.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at this, I have a lot of sympathy, I think, here with the residents there. The trees are very close, and personally, I have no problem at all about them maintaining that piece of land. The problem I have is with actually fencing it. I think the land itself could be quite adequately maintained, no trouble at all. Trees could be cut back, it could be reclassified, but the fence for me is a step too far because I think without the fence it could still maintain the corridor for wildlife and everything else and be perfect, but the fence is the thing that I really have a problem with, and I think therefore I would be basically accepting the officer's recommendation on this one.
Thank you. Been properly moved and seconded to accept the officer's recommendation for refusal. All those in favour? Thank you. All those against? Officer's recommendation is approved. Officers?
Thank you. To confirm that the application has been refused in accordance with the reasons for refusal on the agenda paper.
Thank Thank you very much. Move on to item number 6. And could I ask Mrs. Richardson and Knight to come forward, please? Those two on to my left, your right, please. You come later.
Oh, you are. We've got you.
Yeah. Don't worry, you're not forgotten, Mr. Cottrell. And if you just sit tight while they introduce the application.
This is a planning application at land at Inhurst Lane in Borghurst, Hampshire. The proposal is the erection of one numbered 4-bedroom dwelling with a detached garage with a gym / games room over. There is an update, which is page 4 of your updates. Just noting the viewing panel and what was on the site. And also then, in relation to comments made on the panel, there's some information on the 20-metre buffer and also some information on the application that was discussed to be under construction 800 metres up the bridleway. So there's some information on that property. And then there's also some information about the critical upstream critical drainage area. Our recommendation is to refuse the application.
Mrs. Richardson, between you, you have 4 minutes. How you want to divvy it up to you. Microphone, please. It's the right-hand button, silver button.
There. Yes. Right, sorry. On a daily walk with Labradors, coming literally up that bridleway, as you see there, past the plot that's there, we reach the lane. Now, the lane is important in the sense that always one sees a vast variety, and also coming up the bridleway as well. The Hurst used that as a running track. We see dog walkers, people that are cycling, joggers, horses with the physically and mentally, they alternate weeks, disabled riders coming from the stables that is literally just above it. And so it is a sort of, it's the first bit of countryside that they have access to, and it means that they can, they see it sort of really as a bit of a jewel. And people frequently say to you, we've come from Tadley or Borghurst, and this is just so lovely to be in the countryside so quickly. The other problem with the lane, which is why I wrote about it, is that it is simply too narrow for this sort of, for the traffic involved in any building to be accommodated. On a daily basis, parents take children up to the Montessori school, and invariably there's a sort of minuet as one has to reverse and another. There are very, very few passing places, and so it causes a bit of a logjam. The other point that I wanted to talk about enormously was the countryside, the habitat for the wildlife. It is simply teeming with wildlife, and they are all living joyously in that area. There are examples of creatures that are endangered. I've taken photos of a purple emperor, which is a butterfly, which sadly has dwindled in all the rest of the country, and in Hampshire it is the only spot where one can see it, and there it is. Hearing on Radio 4 on the Today programme a bird expert saying that when there is building, I think he was probably talking about London, that birds simply cannot survive because they're unable to reproduce, they become disorientated, and we have so many wonderful birds in that area. Now you might say to me, hang on a minute, you've got a wood leading up to that spot, surely that's sufficient. But we've been there 32 plus years, and I can assure you I've witnessed really on a daily basis. Our bit of wood is one bit. The other side of the road, you've got the woods leading up all the way to Wheathold and down to the meadows at Ashford Hill with the SSSI connotation there. And these animals move from one side to another. I don't know what you'd describe it as, a channel. It just is the way they live. Frequently, one sees whole families of deer coming through the bit of woodland right next to this plot, along the bridleway and going into the next part. It would stifle them. It would really damage them enormously, and I find that extremely disturbing, to be honest. It seems to me that the harm that would be done in agreeing to this
outweighs the good.
Outweighs the good. Thank you.
Okay. Can
Yes.
I just say that there is a log with the Forestry Commission? Sorry.
This one?
Yes. That's all right. So the Forestry Commission currently have an open log, and the site is a woodland site, it's confirmed, and there is rebuilding to be done. There is also a log now for rare plants that has been found on the site with the DEFRA, Department of Environmental, Food and Rural Affairs, and they've told me to tell you that there are pictures of rare plants, there are nests of birds of prey, and they are going to the site to investigate it following this. So I actually say it's a criminal offence under humanity if you put a massive new plot like that in the countryside. What in the hell would you be thinking when it is a community? You will absolutely crucify the community under the mental health that these people need that are isolated, that get out to walk in the countryside. Why would you ruin the British countryside? I don't have a clue. That's it. Yeah, good.
Thank you. Members, questions to the speakers? Thank you very much, ladies. Thank you.
Have you got no questions at all about the countryside?
I give the members of the committee the opportunity to ask you questions if they don't have questions. Mr. Sanford and Mr. Cottrell, please. And I gather it's just Mr. Cottrell. Mr. Cottrell, you have 4 minutes.
Yeah, good evening, Chairman. Thank you for letting me speak. This application, as you've just heard, is obviously recommended for refusal, which I believe is the wrong decision. If you look at the 3 reasons for refusal, taking the first one being an isolated site. As you will have seen on Friday, there are 3 dwellings that are straight opposite this site. There are a further 11 dwellings within a 300-metre radius of that site. That's 14 dwellings, all within a close proximity. The case officer states in their report that the bridleway provides suitable access to Borghurst, which has obviously adequate means for sustainable transport modes, and therefore the development would be accessible to the main settlement of Borghurst. They then go on to say that this site would be physically isolated and visually isolated, which I don't understand given that there are buildings and dwellings around that site, and it has suitable links obviously to Borghurst. In the update paper, talking about the distances, you see there where it talks about the dwelling that had approval at the beginning of this year. It talks about being 800 metres. That's actually incorrect. 800 metres takes you right up to Cleaver Park Roundabout. It's 225 metres, I believe it is. Talking of that actual application, where that was approved, being 225 metres to the east, that's actually sat within the same area in terms of the wooded area, and within the alongside the bridle path as it goes up through. So I take on board obviously what was just said about the biodiversity harm and the trees, but that particular site previously had no issues from a tree point of view or a biodiversity point of view, and that was approved. So obviously in terms of being consistent, I think that should be something that is a material kind of thing to look at. In terms of the actual tree side of things, you will have also noted that we don't actually have any trees on our site. So they are adjacent to the site, and also 18 months ago, most of the trees to the right-hand side were actually felled, which you will have all seen on Friday. So in terms of asking as to why the tree officer in their opening line that says that the development requires the removal of trees, I asked the question of the officers, and it was the dreaded Google Street View says that there was a tree that was there, and that was dated in 2009. I don't know why that's been brought forward. Given in terms of the harm to the actual landscape, again, I take on board obviously what's just been said about users coming down the bridleway and obviously being able to look out onto this parcel of land. The actual dwelling itself has been based upon Hampshire barns, the materials in terms of a brick plinth, then timber cladding over. And those materials have been selected to try and allow this kind of development to look like a barn and settle into that area. You are going to get domestic paraphernalia with all these sorts of things, but when you were still on site on Friday, you could see other domestic paraphernalia in that area by the houses that are immediately alongside that site. Finally, just obviously in terms of the mixed native hedging and the things that we've actually said on the plans that we would be including, that will enhance the biodiversity side of things. And in terms of the buffer, we talked about the 20 metre buffer zone. The building is actually 19 metres away. So given, I'm a metre out, but in terms of where those trees actually sit, they're well within the other side of the boundary. So I would urge you to approve this application, giving the client the opportunity to self-build a family home. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, questions to the applicant? Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. Page 174 of the report, it says the closest location for local facilities will be in Borghurst, which is located approximately 130 metres to the west of the application site. That's the distance to Borghurst, which is a bit of an ambiguous statement. How far is it actually to the facilities within Borghurst?
Well, first things first, it's actually north-east, not west, so it's to the east. So there's obviously an area there. But in terms of the actual distances, once you're actually onto the Borghurst Road, obviously you've got access there to all the buses and stuff that run backwards and forwards. And then down Heath End Road, you've got the pub there and the shops and the Chinese and all the bits that are actually just down on Heath End Road. And you are able, from straight outside the Hurst School, you are able to obviously take the paths that go through. I mean, I don't know quite how far it is, but when I was measuring the 800 metres that's claimed here, that takes you way past Caliver Park Roundabout, which is obviously on down. It's getting close to where I live. So.
Yeah, I think what's on the display at the moment is trying to show that particular context. No more questions? Thank you very much, Mr. Cottrell. Members, questions to officers? Councillor Dix.
What sort of scale is that, please? I can't read it right.
This isn't to scale. The 800 metres is what was quoted at site, which is why on the update it's in speech marks. It was just there's a new dwelling under construction 800 metres away in that location. This is to help you facilitate what was discussed in the context. The site is shown in red. The house that's under construction, or I'm not sure if it's built yet, but is in the blue, which was in the garden of Heath Row. And it's also quite different in as much as it was within the settlement policy boundary. The application that you've got is on the other side, which is outside the settlement policy boundary.
Councillor Robinson.
Thanks, Chair. In the report under biodiversity, it refers to this 20-metre minimum buffer from the adjacent Heath End copse, and in the update paper it says 20-metre buffer measured from the canopy of the trees. Is that something that is set in stone? Or do we not build within 20 metres of a canopy of trees? Is that just factual policy?
It's not policy, it's within our new SPD, and it states that the tree belt is there for tree belts and woodlands and for biodiversity, and the 20 metres it's to allow the biodiversity to move around, and for trees it's to provide naturally graded edge of woodlands and allow for maintenance and access. And in the case of semi-natural woodlands, the buffer zone should also allow for the natural process of tree death and decay to occur without unnecessary risk to people or property. And it's the minimum of 20 metres should be provided where the edge of the woodland or tree belt and the development, and where a minimum buffer is proposed, information will be required to demonstrate that this will be adequate to prevent any adverse impact upon the woodland or tree belt feature. So the 20 metres is quite clear in our SPD.
And I'd like to myself just ask a supplementary on that one. There wasn't an argument, there was a confusion between the canopy and the edge of the development is the red line, is the site. Or you could, some people were considering the development to be the structure. So is it 20 metres to the red line? Yeah. Okay, because I think all of us involved in planning understand the red line. But there was a discussion on site whether that meant the actual structure of the building. Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions or answers? Debate. Councillor Potter.
If I may start, Chair. I read the report in detail, I hope, and I find it well written. Jumping forward straight away, I think, to the planning balance and conclusions that are made by officers. I mean, I am reminded that isolation can be described in a number of ways, and as it says in the report, given the siting within an area considered to be isolated and unsustainable, it's considered that the proposal would result in an isolated form of development. And I think that's a proposition that I agree with, and therefore is contrary to paragraph 78 and 79 of the MPPF. Goes on to say such a form of development would result in unacceptable harm to landscape character and visual amenities of the area. I'd find it difficult to disagree with that, having considered the scale and footprint of the dwelling and related buildings that are being proposed here. The development would cause a material harm to the intrinsic character of the area, contrary to EM1 and EM10. And again, I have to agree with that proposition. We've had this commentary by the applicant, obviously, in regard to the trees either on the site or adjacent to it, but no information concerning how the proposal would impact the adjacent woodland and nearby trees. Seems to be an acceptance that it is the adjacent woodland and nearby trees, not those on the site itself. But again, without that, it's difficult to see how that can be a satisfactory conclusion for us to reach in regard to the lack of information provided. And once again, I mean, I know we have this sort of Damocles hanging over us in regard to the inability to demonstrate the 5-year land supply that this council currently has, but notwithstanding that, the contribution of one additional dwelling, I don't see, as the planning officers say, to be of significant benefit to the housing land supply, sufficient to outweigh the harm identified, which I see stemming from an application of this size, this footprint in that area, really, and therefore I support the officer's recommendation for refusal to this application.
You support it? Can I take it as a proposal? Thank you very much. It does. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Leeks. And Councillor Bound.
Thank you, Chair. As ward member for Walkhurst and Tadley North, but this particular site and area I do know very, very well. I used to play in those woods. I know it's difficult to believe that I played, but I was once a boy, and those woods there I did play in, so as I live fairly close by. The site that's being spoken of has been a field that I remember for some considerable time, and I walk past it on a fairly regular basis, and I have every sympathy with Mrs. Richardson and Mrs. Knight in their feeling for the countryside and the wildlife and so on. I do have difficulty, though, with the officer reason for refusal number 1. I do not believe that the site is isolated. I don't believe that you can describe it as being isolated in any way whatsoever. Just up that path called Snake Lane, there is Heathrow Copse, where there are at least 12 houses, and there is this proposal for what was being a planning application has been put in and has been approved for another dwelling. Through the trees we could see, I think it's Longridge, and beyond there is Newbies and Newbies West. In another direction you could see the bottom of Heathrow Copse there. Over the road there's a house. Behind that there are 2 significantly big houses. Up the road you've got a small cottage, and then on the corner of Stokes Lane you've got more dwellings. Following round into Brimpton Road, the Hurst School, the Borkhurst Common Estate. By no means can you do... I don't think that the reason for refusal 1 stands up. And that is why Councillor Lovegrove and myself brought this forward to committee. However, the actual design of the dwelling, I feel, is completely wrong for this site. I don't think it's in keeping with the rural nature of the surrounds. And I've been waiting to hear what other people on the committee have said in relation to this application. At the moment I'm inclined to agree with the officer recommendation, but I definitely do not agree with reason number 1.
Thank you very much. Any more for debate? I've been moved and seconded to approve the officer's recommendation for refusal. All those in favour? That recommendation for refusal is approved. Officers?
The application is refused for reasons 1, 2 and 3, which are listed on page 169.
Thank you. Move on to item number 7. A PIP. No speakers. Officers, if you would introduce it.
This is not a planning application. It is an application, a PIP, a prior permission in principle application for the erection of 1 dwelling following the demolition of the existing garage on the site. Just for clarity, as I stated, it's not a planning application, it's a PIP, which could be considered as half a planning application, establishes only the basic principles of development, and then you also have to have technical consent, detailed technical consent afterwards, and on the approval of that, then that would be considered planning permission as you would traditionally think of a full planning application, that all the information has been provided and considered. There is an update on page 5 of 5 which discusses the viewing panel and clarifies the time limit for the proposed PIP as 1 year.
Members, questions to officers. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. On the drawing location plan that's shown now, I think it's Griffin's Court. The green area that's round it, what is that? It's denoted differently from the yellowy area of Griffin's Court. Can you tell us what that land is?
I don't know. This is the application that was submitted by the applicant. As shading, I don't know what its status in planning terms is. It's, I think Griffin's Court looks residential. It could be a large garden, I don't know. I don't think it's allocated as anything on our local plan other than just residential.
So are we assuming that it's part of Griffin's Court, but it's just woodland rather than open area, which is, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and as officers, we always carry out a constraints check when we get applications in. So if this did have a special designation, then that would have been picked up and obviously made reference to in the report.
Councillor Westbrook.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, I appreciate that this will be followed by a technical details consent, but one of the things that struck me is, reading some of the comments in the report, is that there appears to be trees along that line, on that boundary to, I think, where it is green there. And in order for us, I mean, we're being asked to say, can you fit one house, whatever size, within that area? So my answer would be is in relation to the previous application where we were talking about a 20-metre buffer, which Councillor Robinson was talking about, and what we need to go from the edge of the curtilage in. Where is the actual area for one house on here? Because to me, that would read from what we had in the previous application that the actual area to build a house might be smaller, or there might be a route work need to do, but it must be a line that says that's how far you can go. So that's the point I was trying to make. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Having been on the site, I get what you're feeling. It is quite an enclosed green site, but there is a building on there. If you look on page 202 of your main papers, at this stage, we don't know where that line is. But on page 202, under the technical detail consent, under point 5, it's requiring a tree survey, an arboricultural impact assessment, and an arboricultural method statement in accordance with the BS standards. And so it might be that at the point, I'm not prejudicing, but at the time of the technical consent comes in, it might be that the developable area is the building that's there. Well, the building that's there could be a dwelling, a very small dwelling, but you could have a studio with a separate bathroom. It was double garage, big enough. So, yes, there is no, it's not technical detail consent stage, but it could be quite small, but that's at the technical detail consent stage.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
No more questions. Any debate? Councillor Potter.
It's not a debate, Chair, just to say quickly as an observation, I don't know what genius came up with the idea of PIPs, but I have to tell you they're more of a hindrance than a help, but we'll make the best of it, that's for sure. But, I mean, well, anyway.
Duly noted. I'm going to move it from the chair for, unless Councillor Robinson?
Thanks, Chair. Referring back to comments we made earlier, we clearly established that you cannot build within 20 metres, you cannot even have a red line within 20 metres of a tree canopy. We have an SPD against it. You cannot get 20 metres from the tree canopy in this site.
This is outside.
I appreciate that.
Well, then you're not going to debate it.
No, I think we have got.
I'm saying we're not going to debate it outside in terms of reference. Okay.
I don't think it is.
It's just been explained by the officer that it would be subject to the technical detail. And that's outside of the proposal for a purpose. I'm playing hardball on this one. We're wasting time in this committee. We have wasted time because of this actual, if you like, we want to pick it apart now when it's not the right time to pick it apart. We're going to have more of these. We've got to keep it down to the bare bones.
I appreciate that we are going to get more of them, which is why I've brought this up. We quite clearly have an SPD which says you cannot build within 20 metres of a tree canopy, and in that case, the principle of development is therefore flawed.
No, I'm sorry, Councillor Robinson, that is not relevant at this stage of a PIP. It is not a relevant document. This is pure and simple. I couldn't agree more with Councillor Potter when he said this is causing more trouble than it's worth. But we have to go through this particular process. Any kind of detail other than the three elements that we have to consider at a PIP stage are dealt with under technical details. And I have no doubt in some of these cases it will fall purely on what is incorporated into the SBDs within the planning structure. I moved it from the chair. Do I have a seconder for Thank you, Councillor Potter. All those in favour of approval of the recommendation? All those against? Abstentions? Thank you very much. That's officers' recommendation approved. Officers?
I confirm that the commission in principle is approved as, yeah.
Right. Thank you very much. I'm going to wish everybody a very Merry Christmas. I hope tomorrow isn't going to be too long a day. I know it is going to be for me, but long for other people. And thank you very much for 2019. See you in 2020.